So this time, for this in our third of our Inspirations interview series, I'm joined by an incredibly special guest, someone very, very close to my heart, one of the first wind band directors I had the pleasure of sitting under when I was about yay big, who taught me basically, took me through, I think we'll call it hard pieces, shall we? This is Paul Hornsby, who is just a fantastic musician, and I know that he's going to have some incredibly interesting things to say in answer to our Inspirations interviews questions. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, Rhiannon. That's very kind. Appreciate that. That's lovely. Thank you.
So obviously I know you quite well. I've not seen you in a very long time, so there may be things that I don't know now, but give yourself a little introduction of who you are and what you do.
Okay. As you said earlier, we go back a long way. At the time, I was acting as deputy head of service and head of the woodwind department for Gwent Music, and had the absolute pleasure and luxury of being able to direct quite a few very high caliber bands, of which Rhiannon was in. Notably, two of my favorite bands there were the Greater Gwent Symphonic Winds, which was the flagship of all the other wind bands. I also used to enjoy the more junior wind bands at Newport Music Centre and Torvine and South Gwent, where I worked occasionally, but also the Greater Gwent Youth Jazz Orchestra. So the piece, if you like, was quite broad, covering jazz, symphonic wind music, and some other kind of notable little excursions into things like Cajun music with a band called Cajun Spice, and various other little projects that went along the way. So it was halcyon days for me. I had to work with high caliber, well-motivated students is always a pleasure. And the results you can get are just fantastic if you put the energy in. I have to also say that part of that luxury was to be able to head up a team of amazing woodwind and woodwind tutors, but also some great brass tutors that were aligned with the same kind of values, so that things like sectional rehearsals always went really well, and I could rely on those people to be able to get that work done on the understanding of what we were trying to achieve with a particular piece, if that makes sense.
Amazing, yes. It's very strange to sort of like hear you describe it as sort of like, I think it probably was like proper heyday of Gwent music. I got really, really lucky of when I was sort of coming up through it, and then obviously things like budget cuts happen, don't they, which is just horrible and should never happen, but they do.
Well, yeah, that's it. I mean, it's I have to say that for myself, and for myself speaking personally, those were brilliant times, because it wasn't really any kind of effort to do that kind of work. And I know I can speak on behalf of lots of tutors that would say that it was a great pleasure to be able to work on Saturday mornings, Friday evenings, Sundays occasionally.
Amazing. So you retired 7 years ago. How have you sort of been staying musical like during this pandemic? I know you've got a fantastic, lovely family, which are all quite musical as well. Has it been sort of a family effort to keep the music going?
Less so. My family are all over the place now. My son lives up in West Sussex, as does my daughter. Jo, my wife, is incredibly musical, so we've done kind of various gigs together. But I have a studio. I've always had a studio for the last a recording studio in my home for the last 25, 30 years. So it gives me the luxury of being able to do some writing and to do some collaborating. Last year was a difficult one, but I spent the time, working with a producer who I'd worked with years and years ago. In fact, I hadn't seen him for probably about 15 years, and he rang up and asked me to collaborate with him on a prog rock album. Now, prog rock is not my thing, I have to say. It was maybe 40 years ago, but it was a bit of a challenge. So the nice thing about the technology nowadays is if you're working up with similar software, and we work, I'm a Logic 10 user, which is a DAW, DAW, digital audio workstation, and he uses the same. So he could send me files down, I could load them into Logic, work on those, send him back, and we did a whole album. The rest of the band were all over the country. Somebody in Kent, a guy from Scotland, another guy from Mid Wales, and we eventually did get into the studio all at the same time. But a lot of the pre-production work, if you like, was done in this way of being able to mail files back and forth and to work on it. It's a very interesting way of working. It's not as musical as actually having everyone in the same room, but you can actually get some very good work done. So that was that was a guy. The producer was a guy called Danny Chang. He's since moved over to West Wales. He was living in Herefordshire, and that was interesting. Here I've done. I kind of just occupy myself with little projects just to keep my brain going. So I've been writing some tracks, and the thing that I really like is collaborating with people. So for instance, the latest one that I've done, it's actually launched today on Jazz in South Wales, a Facebook page run by a friend of mine called James Kilby. So he's put up this track today. In fact, it's unusual it's today, but that's the day. And I did a piece of writing in a kind of I don't know, kind of Steely Dan kind of vibe, if you like, a groove tune. And I wanted to have a jazz fiddle player improvise over the central section of it. I didn't know anybody, so this is the nice thing about technology nowadays. So on Facebook, I just put, does anybody know of any jazz fiddle players, locally or not locally, that might be interested in collaborating? And I heard back from 2 people, and one just jumped at the chance of doing it. A woman I've never met, Xenia Porteous, and it just turns out she's just a great fiddle player, a great jazz improviser. So, I send her the track, she has a listen to it, she puts it into her workstation and records the track, which I was over the moon with it. She was she's such a talented player, and then just mails me back the violin track minus the rest of the track, so I can then insert it. So that's gone to. I've done a few of those. That's the second one I've done with her, and I've done quite a few with other friends that I know. Trumpet players, horn players, saxophone players, and that just kind of keeps my brain going, if that makes sense. So they don't have any kind of commercial value. I'm not doing it for anything other than the joy of kind of making music. And I think that's really important, to keep enjoying what you're doing and to stretch yourself a little bit.
That's fantastic.
Well, it's a bit indulgent in the way, but I've got the chance to be able to do it here. I really do miss the large ensemble, the doing that kind of thing. But as you said, you rightly said earlier that the culture's changed. Music services, not just in Wales but across the UK, are seeing massive cuts. There was a time when, in fact, when you were learning, the weekly Gwent music, bearing in mind it was teaching across 4 authorities, Newport, Blaenau Gwent, Monmouthshire and Torfaen, we're teaching probably about 15,000 students a week. It's an incredible amount of, across all disciplines, mind, that's across voice, woodwinds, brass, strings, piano, percussion, etc. But still, there's a kind of economy of scale that says, if you're teaching that amount, you're going to find some very talented and serious talent out there that if you're fortunate enough, you can navigate into a music center and into an ensemble. So that's why one of the reasons, apart from having incredibly well motivated staff, was that you can do those kind of things, and when it's organized well, as it was, by the likes of Alan D. Williams and the senior management team that were there at the time. When you've got that support from the local education authority, and you can achieve amazing things, as we did, with the Greater Gwent Youth Brass Band, the Youth Orchestra, the Wind Band, etc. But really, the real success is that we actually motivated students into playing. The icing on the cake is all the awards and the trips to Birmingham and all the rest of it. That's lovely, but really, the real success is that we had so many children, youngsters, actually engaged in making high quality music at the level that they wanted to play at. And you were one of those students that were everywhere.
Oh gosh,
you played in so many different groups and elevated the standard. But when you sat next to a younger trombonist, you don't realize it at the time, but you're motivating that player to become as good as you. They think, I want to be like her. I want to have those skills, and that's a very positive thing. And when you echo that across all the various students that we've had that were very fine players, that was a very positive and constructive thing. Motivated students to achieve even higher, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's sort of, I think it gave me quite an identity crisis, I think, because obviously I was born in Birmingham, ironically, and then, come back down to the Forest of Dean, and I was just over the border, but then going to school in Wales. I mean, honestly, the best thing that ever happened to me was going to Habs in Monmouth, because it gave me this access to Gwent music. And that lent on to exactly. It opened up doors, yeah, and it lent on to Nash, which it's really strange, sort of like during the pandemic. So I married my husband just before the pandemic hit, and he was doing a project with another Nash alumni, and who's moved up to Manchester since moved away, and it's really lovely because it sort of creates this like strange sort of like bond. It's a very tight family, despite the fact that it was spread out across all the country, and and it's amazing how sort of when my husband, who's been Manchester born and bred, was starting to do this project with someone who I obviously knew from Nash when I was much younger. It's a really small world. And then he sort of said, do you know anyone in this quintet that I'm doing? And I looked through it, and they're basically all Nash alumni, and I was like, oh my god, Scafey's doing it, that's amazing. And it was an incredible time. I don't think I've ever played. I went to college. I spent money on a music education, and I've never played in a wind ensemble with a similar caliber to the symphonic winds. I don't think I ever will again, realistically.
That's very kind. And sadly, I'm not sure if I would ever direct a group like that, only because of the the proportions of the sizes and the access to have that to high quality students, and you look at it now and it's suffering very badly, not because there's any lack of talent. I'm a firm believer that the talent pool stays the same. It doesn't alter at all. It's just having access to that talent pool, and students who might, we'd have conversations, we'd have regular team meetings, woodwind brass meetings, and someone would come up and say, you've got to watch this child. I just come across a child in such and such a school, only grade 3 at the moment, but actually this person's going to go far. And you've got those kind of talent spotters, and then you can try and guide those players into groups, and then and actually sometimes they might even just be an average type player. So it's not about absolute excellence. You find that when you put somebody into one of those groups, and they might be kind of fairly kind of nondescript, if you like. That sounds a cruel thing, but they might just be just like an average player. Yep. But they all of a sudden think, God, this is fantastic. What my ears are hearing, I'm loving. I want to do more of this. I want to get better at it. And then you turn around, and 2 years later, that person's right at the top, playing absolutely beautifully. And that's happened to me so many times. I've had my eyes open to say, actually, I never thought you were capable of that. That's just incredible. And actually they go on and they develop really well. But a lot of that is in the culture of education and being able to train students. A lot of the work that I've done with symphonic winds has been being able to train children to know, whatever their instrument is, how they're supposed to be functioning at any point in any particular, and that function bit might be different. Well, it will be different in every piece and in every different scenario, but no. So it's not just about tuning up and playing the dots, being able to play accurately. It's about being able to play musically. And I think what we achieved was to be able to give students we had the luxury, because we'd meet weekly in music centres, that you would have the opportunity to train students to have a kind of lexicon of skills, if you like. Mm-hmm. that they would learn. Maybe it's to do with tonal color. Maybe it's to do with dynamics, or even more important, multi-dynamics, when you involve more than one dynamic. And because you can train students, you had the opportunity to train students in some of those more subtle, refined skills, if you like, that naturally, as they progress, they start to use those skills kind of organically, instead of having to think about it. It becomes part of what they do. So the minute that you do, everyone thinks of dynamics as being volume, going from quiet to loud. But the dynamics just mean anything that changes. So if you increase intensity or rhythmic intensity from one point to another, you've got dynamics, and you build that with other dynamics. You have an incredibly powerful thing that's happening. And because we were doing those kind of exercises prior to rehearsing, when you come to a piece, students know what you're talking about. And so we had years and years of students working in groups, in junior groups, that as they percolate up to the top, those things become common parlance. They become part of what they do. So when they reach the symphonic winds, or the modern ensemble, or the Greater Gwent Youth brass band, or the big band, they're kind of immersed in it. They're doing those things kind of organically, if that makes sense. So it's that's how it happens, I think.
Absolutely. I remember like one of the first times I came down, and I was going to be going into symphonic winds, and I was stood at the back with my mum, before I joined in. And I remember seeing the very start of rehearsal, when we sort of did the rhythm games, and you didn't give a beat. It was, you gave like the bar in of, this is your tempo, and then told everyone, right, you're clapping on, I think like 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and the gaps get gradually bigger. I remember doing it in 7, and I love working in 7. Anything with 7, sort of 7, 8, 7, 4, I love it now, and I credit you 100%. Just dead silence in the room, and then everyone all together, just together in the right place. And it's completely and utterly magical, I think, when it happens like that, when a group of people comes together.
I'm really glad that you remembered something like that, because that comes down to something that's very close to my heart, and that's internalization. I don't think you can teach pulse. You have to experience it, and you have to develop it. And that's one of those invisible skills where you're moving away from a point, and you're going to find a point in the future because of the pulse that you've set up internally. And that's a very good example of it. I think, unfortunately, I mean, I've worked with some adults ensembles as well, and depending on what the culture is within the band, that kind of works or doesn't work. And it's interesting, because I think when you have the luxury of working with students who are open-minded and don't mind the challenges of doing what you're doing, even if they fail at it, they can hear over time that they're kind of getting better at it. I think with adults, very often they understand the principle of it, and so therefore they've got it. Well, actually, it doesn't work like that. Just because you understand what's going to happen doesn't mean you can do it. You need to practice it the same as everybody else.
It takes a long time.
there can be the resistance. So it's like, how can I put it? It's like investing in your own skills that will actually you might not be using that particular skill for maybe a year, but actually by the time you've developed, when that time comes to be able to do that, you're arming yourself up with a set of sub-skills. As I said, a lexicon of sub-skills that you will actually involve into your own playing and involve into the group's playing. Does that make sense? So I would recommend that any music directors, if you've got a 2-hour rehearsal, spending between 10 and 15 minutes every week on a defined set of principles that you can work over a period of time is very good. It might not seem like it pays off, but it definitely does 100% pay off in the long term. And I find with adults they don't always kind of get that. I shouldn't say that all, because I've worked with some groups. I've worked with a group up in Newbury, an adult big band, and they kind of got it. And actually, over a long week, we did a weekend course, and by the Sunday night, they were all buzzing with it, because they could see that it actually influenced their own playing. So, but it doesn't matter what age we are. If you want some skills, there's no shortcut to gaining skills. If you want to have a great tone on a trombone, you can't just think, well, I know what the tone sounds like, I'm going to get it straight away because I understand it. You have to physically put that instrument on your lips, make a pour sound, and gradually over time get to a better tone. And that's a pretty bad example, but do you know what I mean? There's no shortcut. There's no shortcut to good tone, and there's no shortcut to good rhythm, good accuracy, good internalization. But those games that we used to play, 1 7 1 6 1 5 1 4 1 3 1 2 1, etc. they're designed really to get us a good sense of pulse, so that you can keep that sense of pulse within you, walk away, and maybe 5 minutes later still nail that pulse. It hasn't changed, and that definitely works. You know, those kind of games, whether they're rhythmic or whether they're tonal, whether they're scalic, whether they're to do with articulation, then it's putting the effort into that, so that eventually that will pay dividends when you're making music in an ensemble. You know.
Yeah.
So
it makes such a difference.
I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that was my personal philosophy on being able to get good ensembles. And actually the genre makes very little difference.
Yeah.
It can be jazz, it can be symphonic winds, it can be orchestral. The basic principles of musicality are the same, you know, and they will spin off into whichever direction you want to go. You might say, well, I'm interested in jazz, I'm interested in folk music. Well, actually these principles apply to any genre.
Yeah, completely. I think my band are probably going to think I've paid you to say all these things now, because that's exactly sort of what I constantly sort of harp on about. You know, it doesn't matter if it's you know, something insanely difficult, you know, to look at on the page, or if it's, you know, a C major scale. The things are still there that you want to sort of have consistent all the way through whatever it is you're playing. It doesn't make a difference really. But I think that leads on quite nicely, I think, to your musical inspirations. Sort of like, how have they changed over the years? So obviously, like when I was a kid, you know, coming through, and we had so many, especially in jazz orchestra, I noticed a lot. And sort of I came to college and it was like, oh, so these are all the things that people think are cool, you know, and it's very in vogue and all the rest of it, like the Schneider and Bob Brookmeyer. Like there was loads of people being like, and it fed into Marius Nasset as well, with my first term of big band in uni. You know, we tried an incredibly difficult Marius Nasset tune, Lion, and sort of working through that. And it was hilarious because I was coming from college to uni all the time. So started on joint course and sort of coming into the university, trying all these things that were sort of like in vogue, as it were, especially the Nasset tune, and looking at it and sort of going, I could pick out of it and sort of see, like, I know what that is because I've done it with Paul in youth big band, which was sort of quite hilarious, sort of looking at it, and you can pick out certain things. So obviously I got a lot of inspiration from the things that we covered in Gwent Music. What were your inspirations? I'm
always one for listening to new music, and whether it's symphonic winds or jazz, I think there's always something interesting in cutting edge music. It's interesting you mentioned the Maria Schneider, because the very first time I put that in front of a youth big band, the response was very negative. Oh, this is rubbish. I won't say what was said. It was worse than rubbish. And I said, well, actually, no, listen, you're coming to it from the wrong angle. Just bear with me. I can promise you this is good music. And by the end of the course, we had students actually going and buying the CDs and buying the, you know, so for me, I've learned a few lessons. I was fortunate enough to have a good friend, a guy called Jonathan Lewis. He started life as a cellist and went on to become a really fine tenor saxophone player. In fact, I included him in one of the big band. He came and guested with us. And he lived in Swansea, but was working for a high-tech company and was very often going to New York. And every time he'd come back from New York, he'd drive along the M4 and he'd get off the M4 at Newport, knock on the door and say, Paul, have a listen to this. And actually, he was the person that introduced me to Maria Schneider. And I'll tell you the story because this has some relevance to young musicians, I think. So he gave me it was a cassette at the time, cassette thing. And actually on the cassette, there was a paper cover and he wrote down all the tunes. But not only did he write down all the tunes, he wrote all the musicians. Now, that's a big band. So he was writing down 18 to 20 musicians and what instruments they played. And he gave me I can remember it was an album called Evanescence. It was Maria Schneider's first album. And I was coming to this from a fairly regular kind of big band experience, if you like. And I put it on, I thought, oh my God, I just don't get this. It's just, I don't like it. I'm finding it really hard to understand. And actually what the problem wasn't the music. was too difficult, but my ears were too naive. I hadn't had them opened up. And I remember listening to it, I thought, this guy knows what he's talking about. He wouldn't give me rubbish, he used to do this regularly. And I had an epiphany. I was going to the office from my home in Newport up to Melfort Road, where the office was based at the time. And I put that cassette on, and it was like a revelation. This is about 2 years later, by the way. I went, oh my God, how could I not have got this? And I had to stop the car and just listen to it because I couldn't concentrate on the driving aspect. And so I kind of finished the piece, and I thought, well, what has happened then? Obviously, what's happened over that 2-year period is that my experience of listening to other kinds of music has kind of influenced my brain to be kind of more open to newer sounds. And it wasn't like a gradual thing that went from, I don't understand it, I understand it a little bit, I'm getting to understand it, now I understand it. It was like a switch. It went from, I don't get this, to I get it. And so I would urge anybody that you have to know the integrity. You need to have someone that you can trust that will give you music and say, listen, you might not like this, but actually try listening to this. And if you don't like it at first, it could be that you just need to persevere a little bit and just keep coming back to it every few months, because actually, if there's any real musical integrity in it, and if you're a musician, you will get it. So what I'm saying badly is that very often with music of the highest quality and at the highest caliber, it might take some investment in your own listening to be able to gradually get there. So, it's worth persevering. And for every instrument that someone says, that I won't like, or a banjo, okay? You say, who the hell would like a banjo? Well, actually, don't be surprised, because there's someone out there that's going to turn your head around. I'm trying to think of someone like Chris Thiele, American folk musician, who plays with Brad Meldau now, occasionally as guests, and he plays mandolin, and wouldn't be my first choice of an instrument to listen to, but he plays so beautifully. He's done a whole load of Bach sonatas on solo mandolin, and they're just absolutely stunning. So all I'd say is keep your ears open, keep your mind open. And I mean, nowadays with things like Facebook, it's so good if you can build up a community of friends and musicians. Very often I'll get something from ex-students who say, Paul, have a listen to this. I think you might like it, or even if you don't have it, check it out. Wow, I would possibly never have found that left to my own devices, but it's a real gift when someone gives that to you. In fact, I used to do this on with the big band and with the symphonic ones. Just throw out a little name there and say, just if you're really into music, just check this person out. Go onto YouTube, go onto iTunes, and follow up that strand.
And I've still got the course CDs I used to put together of the sample tunes that we would be covering. Yeah, they were fantastic, absolutely brilliant. And there's some of them, because it's very easy to sort of fall down especially with don't get me wrong, it's fantastic, and I love streaming because it makes so much more music so accessible. But it's very easy with like algorithms to sort of get just sucked down into like one strand of music, and you're like, yep, this is, and it keeps suggesting more of the same. And it's very, very easy to sort of get stuck in a rut, as it were, with what you're listening to.
That's a really interesting point. And I'm not a Spotify person. I never kind of rationalized it like that, actually. I didn't probably realize I was being subject to an algorithm. But that must be the case, because to be diverse, I mean, to be eclectic, I think is very good. And there was a guy from not Ian Poole, I can't think of his name now, gave me a CD. He knew that I was starting to listen to Cuban music, and he gave me it was a DVD with thousands of tracks on, and I just stuck them onto my iTunes thing and found some really great leads, a Cuban band called Interactivo, but amongst many others. And it's very interesting, because you wouldn't necessarily go down that path, and all of a sudden it's open to you. So I'd say be eclectic, listen to as much, and try and draw something from the music that you're listening to.
When I was sort of looking at putting together this series, and I spoke to my mum about some of the stuff that we did, like when I was growing up, and she referenced the Mark Camp House, the Watchmen Tell Us of the Night, And interestingly, I listened to it on Spotify, and it's a fantastic recording. Can't remember who did it. It's an absolutely brilliant recording. But I was like, I don't remember why I liked this so much. Why did I really like this? And then I went back and listened to a poor quality YouTube recording of us doing it in Birmingham, when I was, teensy tiny. And it had that effect again. And it had that same sort of like, it was tears streaming down my face by the end of it. And I think
you probably had 4 tubas in it as well.
Yes, exactly. Massive bass end. It was awesome. It was just a full row of low brass at the back. It was amazing. But yeah, I think definitely you can have an incredible piece of music as well. And if you've not got the passion behind it, if you're just sort of like, churning it out, then you can hear that. You can definitely, there's an audio quality, I think, to passion behind playing. And that was something that I think just made that era of symphonic winds just so incredible. Everyone really wanted to do it well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me, some of this stuff was on the cutting edge of my technique, my directing skills technique, if that makes sense. Because as a director, you need to be able to not just only communicate your intention with what you're doing, but you need to have the way for all to be able to keep that together, technical skills. So for me, I used to get really quite scared before a performance, not because of the ability of the students, but my own personal ability to be able to make sure I didn't kind of screw up on any of that stuff. There's
you
another
never
good
showed it. You never showed it.
Unfortunately, there are a few people in the band that keep an eye on me. Esther Williams was one of those. Remember Esther? The
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
She give me a little wink like that. Yeah. Just saw you drop a beat, Paul. Oh God. I'd recover. It's team play at the end of the day. If you look at any great football, rugby team, whatever, it's just not 15 great players. It's 15 great players who need to work as a team. They know what their function is in any given situation, what to do. So it's not just all about personal fitness or being, in musical terms, being a great executant. It's about knowing how you need to support your other musicians and what you need to be able to do to make that happen. So there's big analogies, if you like, between sport and music, I think.
Final question. Give yourself or the watchers a piece of musical advice, either for youthful you or current you.
I think I'd have to go back to what I was saying in terms of eclecticism and actually having your ears opened. The thing that's spurred, and to keep learning. I went to music college down at Dartington, and I came out after 3 years of being there, knowing one thing: how ignorant I was and how much more work there was to do. And I had a great time. I studied hard at Dartington. I loved what I did there, but it was just like peeling back and think, oh my goodness, I've got all this to go. And actually not being frightened of the challenge of being able to learn and to keep learning for yourself, your personal skills. If you're a flute player, saxophone player, trumpet player, tuba player, trombone player, whatever, learning to refine those skills and actually enjoying the process. But also learning more broadly about being able to be more open-minded about other styles of music. As I say about people like banjo players and whatever think of something that's diametrically opposed to your musical taste. Finding the complete opposite, you will find executants in that field that will turn your brain on and really excite you musically, and trying to learn from all of that so that it becomes part of who you are musically. You become a very unique musician that is influenced by so many different styles and different types. It doesn't make you weaker for being broader, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It can make you very, very strong.
So yeah, fabulous. Thank you so much for your time, Paul. This is, as I say, I've kept you for far longer than I said I would, and I do apologise, but we've sort of just chatted on. Really.
So it's been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has made me want to practice. So there you go. You've achieved something today. That question.
Well, it's very kind, Rhiannon. It's been so lovely to speak to you and to see you.
It's great to catch up.
Send my love to your mum as well.
I will do. Yep.
Brilliant.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Paul.
No, it's great. Hope to see you soon.
Hope to see you soon. Yes, when pandemic allows.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Rhiannon.
Thank
see
you
you soon.
So thank you so much to Paul for a genuinely inspiring conversation there. It's made me want to get the instrument back out of the case and actually, do some practice and all that. And rather than the next one in our inspiration series, we are going to be having an online Wind Band Day on the 11th of April, in which we'll be holding a Q&A panel regarding inspirational music, and hopefully with some of our guests as well that have come from this series. So if you go to our website, www.worsleyconcertband.co.uk, you'll see the Wind Band Day 2021 sign up, and you can perhaps sign up for the Q&A panel and ask some questions about getting musically inspired for yourself.